those who have connected from UK, from Ghana, from Nigeria, from India. You're all welcome to our session on database modeling and design with SQL. So this afternoon, we are going to be, today I'm not doing a presentation, I'm actually doing a demonstration. So we are going to look at how to use the visual paradigm to design an entity relationship model. We've been working with the company database. We are going to create or demonstrate the modeling of the company database using visual paradigm. If there's a bit of time, I'll show you the interface for the SQL Server Manager, and probably we'll look at how that we use the SQL Management Studio to also design the model. Today we are going to do more of practical, so I need you to follow me and look at the steps that we'll be going through in designing the model. Let me stop this share. No, let me just go straight to our visual paradigm. Okay. Let me start my Windows in case we would have to use the okay. So visual paradigm. Yeah. So this is the tool that we'll be using for modeling. This is just one of the diagramming tools that people normally use. Let me just share this direct so that we don't get any interruptions. Yeah. Okay. So visual paradigm actually has a whole lot of tools that we could implement or you could use in your organization. I use it mainly for UML modeling and entity relationship, but it has quite a lot of features that you could use. Some agile tools, you could use it for business model canvas, diagram templates, data flow diagram, organizational chart, user story, use case description, and all of that. But they have different versions. I'm using the community edition now to do this demonstration. There is the modular, the standard, the professional, and the enterprise. All of it has the features that you could use. So we'll start by first creating, we'll create a project. We'll create a project to store our diagrams inside. So the project is more like creating a folder where you have all your diagrams in there. Because for a particular project, you could design an UML diagram, an entity relationship diagram, a mind map or a brainstorming diagram. All of it could all be in that project. So we'll create a new project. I would call the project, let's say, would assume that I'm developing this for Lean Icon. So I'll just call it Lean Icon, and we'll create a blank project. Good. Then we'll go to diagram and create a new diagram inside the project. You'd realize that when you create the project, the title of your window changes. It has the name of the project there. These are all diagrams that could be modeled in the visual paradigm, entity relationship, activity, use case, 5 whys, all of these, bar charts. It's used for some visualization as well. I'm just interested in this, so we proceed. When you're creating the diagram, it gives you a blank project, or you could use any of the templates. So you could look through the templates and see if the data that you're trying to model, there's a template here. If there is an existing template, you could use that template and edit it to suit what you have. If there is none, you could just go straight and create a blank project. So I go blank. I'll call this company ERD. Yep. Then I click OK. It opens this interface for me. In the ERD, there are three main things that we look at. We are going to look at the entity, the attributes, and the relationships. So we use that same step. All the tools are located on the left pane of your window. So you'd have the entity, the views, the sequence, and the relationships here. We'll start with the entity. Just click and come and drag, and you have your entity created. For this, I would use 4 entities. So let me just create them down. I'll come and edit each of them later. Yeah. Okay, so my first one is employee. I'd call this department. This would be job role. As I said, we are just modeling it according to the example we've been using or the scenario we've been using all along. So, and last one is project. In our employee, we want to create the attributes or the columns now. So just right click and click on new column. Our first column will be ID. Hit enter. I would like to create all the columns, then I come and look at the data types and whatever constraints that are available. So ID, first name, last name, let's say date of birth. What else? Email and phone number. I think we can work with this for now. Yeah, I don't need this. Delete. Yeah. Okay. So ID we can leave it as an integer. We'll need it as an integer, but we have to indicate that it's a primary key. So we just right click and you see include in primary key, and it changes the icon to a key to show that that is a primary key. First name, we'll change it from integer to varchar. Remember we said varchar is varying characters. First name can take maybe up to 20 characters here. Last name should also be the same, varchar up to 20 characters, meaning we are not expecting the last name to be more than 20 characters. Date of birth, we'll change this to date. We just put date, it knows the format to use. Email, we use varchar as well. And varchar up to what? Let's say 50. Okay. Then phone number, because we might be looking at including the country code, so the plus would come in. So we have to use varchar here as well. Would say varchar, let's say 15. Yeah. So that's it for the data types for employee. Then we now check the constraints, which ones can be now. The N you see here means that all of these can be now, but in our database, I don't think we would have an employee who doesn't have a first name or a last name or even a date of birth. So right click and we say nullable, we uncheck it. Last name, we uncheck it. Date of birth, we expect all our employees to have date of birth, so we uncheck it. Email, even if you don't have a personal email, maybe the company would give you an email address, so we uncheck it also. Phone number, yeah, if the company is not willing to give you a phone number, we'll just assume that someone wouldn't have a phone number, so we can leave that blank. So we can leave that to be nullable. Email, every employee is supposed to have a unique email, so we can say this is unique. It puts a U beside email. The rest, they don't have to be unique. 2 or more people can have the same first name, last name, date of birth. So we leave this. Then we come to department. Department, we create an ID for the department. We create a name for the department, probably a location. We are good. Yeah. Our primary key here would be ID. So we uncheck, we just include in primary key and it changes it to a key. Name should be varchar. So we'd say varchar department, let's say 50. No, not 500. Then location, also varchar. We could use 50 as well. A department should have a name and it should be unique. So we'd say it's unique And we can't have a department without a name, so it cannot be nullable. It should always contain a value. Location, let's assume that we can have virtual department, so we can say location should be, could be nullable, meaning it could be empty. We come to job role, we do the same thing. Job role would have an ID, would have, let's say, a job title, and then a description probably. We say this would be our primary key. Job title would be VARCHAR, varying characters of up to 50. Then description. Now take note, I'll just say VARCHAR here and hit enter without entering the number, the limit, and it would assign 255 as the maximum. So title, job title would be unique as well. Description can be now, yeah, so, oh, sorry, this, and then nullable. Then let's take the last one on project. Okay, there's a question here. Why is ID not set as unique? ID is not set as unique because when we say it's a primary key, when we indicate it as a primary key, by default, it means it's unique. So we don't need to include unique again, yeah. Because the primary key is like the uniqueness is embedded in the primary key. So project ID, oops. ID here, new column here. Let's say the project title, maybe a description. Yeah. Then a location of the project would be fine. Yeah. What's the difference between unique and primary key? Okay, so I'll be answering them whilst I'm working on this. You could have several attributes that could qualify to be a primary key in your table. So let's say for the employee table, employee ID is unique, email is also unique, but only one of them can qualify to become a primary key. So we select one. That means we are selecting ID in this instance. Any other candidate key, any other attribute that qualifies to be the primary key but it's not selected, we call it the primary key. So this email is a candidate key and we need to indicate that it should be unique. So in this table, we have email and ID to be unique. But among the two unique attributes, one of them is a primary key. So we indicate that as a primary key and the other remains as unique. Every primary key is unique as well, but not every unique attribute is a primary key. Thank you. Okay, let me just work on the characteristics for this. This is a primary key. What then is nullable? Nullable is an attribute that can be empty or can be blank. Yeah, so it's just like when you're filling a form and you have required and not required. So if it's required, then it is not nullable. If it's not required, then it is nullable, meaning it can be empty. Yeah. So in this case, we are saying that we are assuming that maybe an employee might not have a phone, so it's nullable. So in this case, title cannot be null. Every project should have a title, and it should be unique as well. Description could be null. Location, let's say you should have a location, so it cannot be null. Yeah. So these are a little sample of a company or ERD of the company database. So now let me go through the checklist. We have our entities, we have our attributes. Yeah, okay, yeah, nullable is like optional entry, exactly. Yeah. So we have our entities, we have our attributes, we have our data types, then we have the constraints, the null constraints and the unique constraints. Then we now have to create the relationships among the various entities. Let's take the first two entities, employee and department. An employee belongs to a department. In our examples, we said that an employee cannot belong to two departments at the same time, even though the employee could be working in two or more departments. So we say here would have many employees working in a department. That is a many-to-one relationship. When we look at our left pane, we have the relationship types over here. We just pick many-to-one relationship, click on employee, and then drag to department. Then it creates that. We'll call it employee works in. Hit enter. We are good. That's our first relationship. Now, if you were very observant, you realize that when we created the relationship, something happened. It didn't have department ID originally here. But after creating the relationship, the system adds department ID to employee. Department ID is the primary key of department. So whenever we reference it in another attribute, in another entity, it becomes a foreign key. So this department ID you see here is a foreign key because it is making reference to this ID in department. Let me take that once again. Remember I told you that when you, for the primary key and the foreign key, it's very critical when you're creating relationships. If you don't get it right, your database will not be of good structure. So we created, let me just undo this here. So there's many-to-one relationship from employee to department. I select the many-to-one, I click on employee, I drag to department. You'd realize that it immediately adds the department ID. The name of my relationship is works in. So I type works in there, hit enter. This department ID here is a foreign key because it is relating or making reference to this department ID here, which is a primary key. Okay, let's take another relationship. Employee to job role is also many-to-one because many employees will be assigned a particular job role. Very simple one. We click, drag and drop. You see job role ID also appears here. It creates it for you by default. So employee is assigned. We'll call the relationship is assigned a job role. Then we take department and project. Every project belongs to a department or department controls project, but a department could control several projects. So we say this relationship will be a one-to-many. When you are reading from department, it's one-to-many. When you are reading from project, it's many-to-one. So let me use the one-to-many. You'd see that this would pop up a dialog box requesting for some information. The ID in department should link up with a column here. So we want it to generate its own column. So it will generate a default column, which would appear in project. You see that department ID appears here. So every project will now have a department assigned to it. We would call relationship controls so that it sounds like department controls project. Click on OK, we have that. Then the last relationship that we'll look at is employee and project. An employee could be working on several projects at a time. The same way, several employees could be working on one project. So the relationship here is a many-to-many relationship. Select many-to-many, click on employee, drag to project. Then for every many-to-many relationship, the system creates a new entity, which combines the primary key of employee and the primary key of project. That is how the database is structured for every many-to-many relationship. That's the best way to do that. So employee works on project. Then we have that. Let me check the chat. There is a question. Backend and limit was not assigned to project. Oh, yeah. Sorry about that. Okay, so title, I didn't do this, sorry. This should be Vaca. Title, let's say 50. Description, I would use the highest, VACA 255, hit enter. Location, I would say VACA 50 as well. VACA 50. Then department ID is integer. We're good. Okay. So this is an example of how the ERD is created using the visual paradigm. In other editions of the visual paradigm, you could export this and it will create a database directly for you, either in MySQL or SQL Server. The community edition doesn't have that feature. Yeah, but this quite simple. It might not always be simple like this because this is just a small scope that we are working with. Sometimes you could have a very wide scope of project and you would have all the diagrams scattered all over the screen. And you might even be forced to split up the diagrams into various bits. Okay, so our time is almost up. I think I'll just pause here and take a few questions. So can you just do Control S to save your work? You could export it. Okay, so this is lane icon. Let me just save it somewhere here. In VP Project Save, yeah. Okay, you could export your diagram anyway. Let me see where that feature is. Project, then you have export active diagram as image, or you could export all the diagrams in the project as image. Yeah, I only have one, so I could just do active diagram as image. Company ERD, okay, let's say 2. Then we save. Let's open the file. Yeah, it saves this for you. You can share this file with your colleagues or anybody. So it's quite simple. The community edition would put some watermark here. The other editions do not do that. Yeah. Okay, so I think I'll just pause here and take questions. So if you have any question, you can just unmute your mic and ask your question, or you could put it in the chat.
Don Carlos.
Hi,
Thanks for today's session, man.
Yeah.
What's that sigh for? Thanks for today's session. I was just thinking,
yeah,
when you're establishing the relationship, yeah, between one entity and another, yeah, on the dotted line, you always give it a name, like works in, controls, works on.
Yeah.
This has to be something that you, as the person designing it, doing the UML, has to give a name to. You have to.
Yeah.
There's no hard and fast rule about it.
Not at all. There's no hard and fast rule. So the names of the relationship is anything that you think can connect the two entities.
Yeah.
So it's just any name. Usually people like to use verbs to depict because the entities would be nouns. So you use verbs to create that association or that relationship between the two entities. Yeah. But there's no fast rule. Anything that would make your diagram readable or understandable. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Thanks.
Yeah. There's a question here. So where do we enter the names of the attributes? So the names of the attributes are these ones that we have the columns. So let's assume we have a new column here in department called, let's say, manager. I right click in the entity. This is the entity. I right click and I click on new column. It gives me the chance to enter the name of the column. I say manager. I hit enter. It creates a default. It creates a default data type for you. The default is integer 10. If you think the column that you've created or the attribute that you've created doesn't need an integer data type, we just go back and edit it and change it and apply the other constraints. There's another question. It says, why was the employee project entity created? Okay. So this was created because the relationship between employee and project is a many-to-many relationship. Many-to-many because we are saying that many employees could be working on one project and one employee could be working on many projects. If you don't create this, trying to keep track of which employee has worked on which project would be difficult. When you are normalizing your data or when you are structuring your database, this would mean that, let's say, under employee, you would have to list several projects here, or under project, you have to list all the employees that work under a particular project. That wouldn't be a good design. So what it does is it pulls out a new entity, which now takes the primary key of employee, the primary key of project, and keep it there. So you could have one employee working on several projects, all of it listed in this new entity. But you can always relate the two, because with the primary key, you could have access to all the attributes of employee. You can have access to all the attributes of project as well. So it's just one of the rules or constraints when you are creating a database. For every many-to-many relationship, it's very important to create a new entity for it. Yeah. Isaac, your hand is up.
Yeah, so I wanted to know what, in terms of the platform that you've done this module, normally I've done it before, but I use the PCO Studio. Where can I download this platform from?
Visual Paradigm, I think you can just go to their website. Just type Visual Paradigm on Google and it will link you to their website. So as I said, they have different editions. The community edition is free, okay, which is not for commercial use, but they have professional and enterprise editions as well. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
There is something you said, Carlos, about that. I didn't quite get that bit. I think I must have been a little distracted. You said that if not because this is the community edition, you would have done that. I lost out just that first part.
Okay. Yeah, there was a bit where it allows you to, where do I find that too? You can move this diagram into your database directly. It will create a database for you. Okay. I think this is it. So you can use this and select a particular database, connect to your database, and this diagram that you see here will create its own database for you in the system, either on MySQL or SQL Server. The community edition, I'm saying, that doesn't have that feature. The enterprise and the professional has that feature. So once you're able to get your diagram correctly, once you export it, it will create the database for you. You don't need to worry about creation of the database. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So why don't you have the other one, the enterprise or the commercial one?
I use this for demonstration purposes. Okay, there's another question. Can it be possible for a project to have same job role of an employee, any relationship? So are you talking about connecting job role to project? Emmanuel, is that your question? Yeah, okay. It is possible, but it depends on how you want to structure your database. As I said, when you're creating your database, there's no strict rule about how you structure it. It depends on how you want to design your database. So if, assuming you want to say that every job role belongs to a project, then we can do that. So we could have, in a project, we could have several job roles. So we can say that this would also be many-to-many, actually. Because if we take, let's say, a research person or a Scrum Master or a product owner, a business analyst, there could be several business analysts or Scrum Masters. No, Scrum Master, you'd have only one on a particular project. So let's say developers. Developer as a job role. So you would have several developers on a particular project, and you could have several, one developer on several projects. So that would be a many-to-many relationship for this. So it would end up being like this. But now the thing is, because we're able to link up employee to project, and we're able to link job role to employee, that means that we can still access the job role of all the employees who are on a particular project. When you're creating queries, there's something we call join. when you join employee to job role to project, you can write a query that would give you a list of all the employees and their job roles and the projects that they are working on. So that's the beauty of creating these relationships. But if you don't structure it well, you can't run such a query to retrieve that kind of data. Yeah, that's why it's important to have a well-structured query. Yeah. Okay, so we are gone past our time, so I think we would end our session here. I think next week I would continue with a bit of demonstration. I'll move on to the main SQL side, would look at how to create a database in using SQL, type in a few queries and all of that. But for next week, you can join us for the Agile testing and automation session on Monday, and the business agility, focusing on the SAFe framework on Tuesday as well. Enjoy your day, and bye for now.